I was a young girl when I first learned that a village can carry two faces, one of beauty and one of fear. And now, sitting here in the twilight of my years, when I close my eyes, I still see both faces as if they were painted yesterday. Our village. It was not grand. No city could envy it. But to me it was the world itself. The mornings always began with the call of the rooster, and the sound of wooden ladles striking against copper pots. Women's laughter drifted through the courtyards as they swept the dust and sprinkled water to cool the ground. The smell of damp earth after rain, sweet, rich, alive, would cling to the air. I remember the fields stretching far like green seas, the children racing barefoot, their giggles echoing like little birds darting in the sky. I thought then that life was simple, that if you worked hard and kept your head bowed in respect, nothing could harm you. How naive I was, for behind the soft curtain of beauty lived another face of the village, one darker than the night itself, and its shadow was carried by a single man. Well, not really a man yet, but the nephew of the chief, a boy born into the taste of power before he could even chew his bread properly. His arrogance was like a disease, spreading into every corner, and everyone feared to speak his name in anger, for his uncle's authority stood behind him like a wall no one dared to climb. But I came to know that shadow more than most. When I was married, I entered my new home with dreams stitched into my heart. I was young, trembling, but hopeful. My husband, kind and soft-spoken, worked hard though his shoulders already carried the weight of poverty. His family was not wealthy, but their hearts were honest, and I believed that honesty was enough to build a life upon. In those first days, I tried to memorize every sound and every smell of my husband's home. The sound of his mother's bangles as she stirred the pot, the way the breeze rattled the thatch roof when the winds came, the sharp sweetness of jaggery melting on the tongue, shared secretly when there was a rare little surplus. I held on to these things as a bride holds on to jewels, because they made the poverty seem softer, almost beautiful. But soon, the shadow of the nephew began to creep closer. He was tall for his age, with eyes that burned like coals when someone displeased him. He carried his chin high, as though the earth itself should bend when he walked. And the worst part was, people let him believe it. For wasn't he the blood of the chief? Didn't power sit in his veins, waiting to one day bloom fully? At first, his presence was like the hum of a distant wasp, annoying but harmless if you stayed away. He would swagger through the market, snatch fruit without paying, kick a stray dog just to show he could. The shopkeepers would bow and smile, though their eyes burned with quiet rage they dared not voice. Mothers pulled their children close when he passed, whispering warnings not to look too long at him. And I, naive as I was, thought he was just a spoiled boy who would grow out of it. But power is a vine. If you do not cut it when it is small, it will crawl into your walls, your roof, your very bed, until you cannot breathe. He came first to my husband, demanding a small sack of grain. My husband, with hesitation, handed it over, though it was grain we ourselves needed. Just once. He told me softly that night, avoiding my eyes. It is better not to argue. He will forget us if we give quietly. But he did not forget. The next week he returned. This time it was chickens. Then it was labor in the field. Then it was simply the thrill of calling my husband in public, making him stand like a servant, while others pretended not to see. Each time a little piece of my husband's dignity was torn away, like threads pulled from a cloth. I watched him shrink, day by day. His back curved lower, his voice grew quieter, and my heart broke, for I loved him. I loved him not for wealth or strength, but for the gentle way he once looked at me, as though I was more than the poverty we shared. But how long can love survive when shame eats at its roots? The nephew's shadow grew heavier. Sometimes he came to our door at night, his voice sharp, his fist slamming against the wood just to remind us that we lived under his power. My hands would shake as I lit the oil lamp, praying he would not ask for more than we could give. My mother-in-law whispered prayers, My husband stared at the ground, and I would sit in silence, swallowing my fear because what else could I do? And yet, somewhere inside me, a small flame began to burn. It was not courage. Not yet. It was something quieter, more secret. A question that returned to me again and again in the silence of the night. Must we live like this? Must fear be our master forever? I did not know then where that question would lead me. I only knew that one day I would have to answer it. And that answer, it would not just change my life. It would ripple across the women of the village, across the very soil of our fields. For we, the ones bowed under his arrogance, would learn that even shadows vanish when enough small flames gather together. But that, my child, is a story I must tell you slowly, piece by piece. For such memories cannot be spilled like water. They must be poured like tea, gently. So you taste every drop. And so, let me begin. When I first entered my husband's home, the world felt as though it had cracked open a new dawn just for me. I still remember the way the air smelled that morning. Freshly cut hay and wood smoke. The village women sang old songs as they walked with me, their voices wrapping around me like a blanket of blessings. My heart beat so fast that I thought the whole world could hear it. I was young, so very young, carrying more dreams than dowry. My bangles jingled nervously as I stepped across the threshold of my husband's courtyard, and I told myself, this will be the soil where I grow roots. This will be the place where my children laugh, where my hair will turn silver, sir. My husband stood beside me, his eyes lowered in shyness, but there was kindness in them, a softness that steadied my trembling heart. His mother welcomed me with oil lamps and sacred words, her weathered hands pressing against my forehead in blessing. Though their home was small, made of mud walls and a thatched roof, I felt warmth in it, the warmth of honesty, of survival, of simple dignity. In those first days, I worked hard to weave myself into their rhythm. At dawn, I rose with the family, swept the courtyard until the dust swirled away, fetched water from the well. My hands blistered from carrying pots, but I did not complain. I cooked with my mother-in-law, kneaded dough until my arms ached, and served food with a shy smile. Each evening I sat by the fire, listening to stories, feeling the threads of belonging tighten gently around me. There was poverty. Yes, the roof leaked when rains came heavy, the clay stove smoked too much, and sometimes the meals were thinner than we hoped. But I believed love and patience could patch every hole. Yet even in those first golden days, the shadow was already circling. The nephew of the chief. His name I shall not give, for even now I feel a bitterness on my tongue when I think of it. Let us just call him the nephew. He had a way of appearing uninvited, like a storm cloud that drifts in front of the sun. One evening, just as we were sitting down to our modest meal, he swaggered into the courtyard. No greeting, no respect, only the heavy sound of his boots striking against the earth. My husband rose quickly, his shoulders stiff with unease. "Uncle's house is low on grain," the nephew announced, his voice sharp as if we were his servants. "You will send a sack before morning." I froze, my hand still holding the bowl of lentils. A sack of grain? We had just enough to stretch through the week. My mother-in-law's face tightened, but she said nothing. My husband nodded quietly, agreeing without protest. After he left, silence hung over the courtyard. I wanted to ask, why must we give? Why not say no? But the words died on my lips. My husband sat with his head in his hands, and I could see the shame burning on his cheeks. The next morning, I watched him carry that heavy sack to the nephew's house. His back bent low, but not from the weight alone. From that day, I began to see something dim in his eyes, a light I had adored when I first looked into them. It did not end there. Weeks later, as I returned from the well with water jars balanced on my hips, the nephew stood in the lane. He blocked my path, grinning as though I owed him my steps. "Tell your husband to come to my fields tomorrow," he said lazily, I need hands. I lowered my gaze, pretending not to see the arrogance in his smile. I simply nodded and walked past, though my heart pounded with anger. When I told my husband, he nodded again, silent. He went, worked all day without a coin in return, and came home exhausted, his palms bleeding. That night, as I bandaged his hands with strips of cloth, tears stung my eyes. "Why must you obey him?" I whispered. He looked at me, his face weary. "Because he is the chief's nephew. Because no one refuses him. Because it is safer this way. Safer." The word tasted bitter. What safety was there in slowly starving while another feasted? What safety was there in surrender? But I held my tongue, for I was young and still learning the ways of this world. And so, little by little, the nephew began weaving his threads into our lives. He came whenever he pleased, demanded what he desired, and left us smaller each time. At first, the village whispered. They pitied us in their glances, but no one dared to speak aloud, for all of them feared the same shadow. They had seen the chief's nephew humiliate others, take what he wanted and walk away, untouched. He was not a ruler, yet he carried himself like one. And his uncle, the chief, turned his eyes away, pretending not to see the cruelty born of his own family. For me, those early months of marriage became a test of endurance. I learned to smile even when the cupboard was bare, to sing softly even when my throat was dry with worry. My mother-in-law often whispered to me, "This is how it is, child. Some men are born with power in their blood. Best not to fight it." But in my heart I began to feel a seed of something else, a small defiance that trembled quietly, waiting for its time to grow. I could not name it yet, but it whispered to me at night, when my husband lay asleep and the house was still, "Is this truly the only way? Must we bow forever?" And so, while I played the obedient bride by day, inside me a question was forming, a question that would one day lead me to paths I had never dreamed, to allies I had not yet met, to courage I did not know I possessed. But back then, in those early days, all I had were the first bruises of humiliation and the faint echo of that seed's whisper in my chest. The days passed, and the nephew's shadow only stretched longer across our home. What began with sacks of grain and hours of unpaid labor soon grew into something heavier, something that pressed on our chests, even when he was not there. I used to think that fear lived only in the moment. A quick shiver, a racing heart, the cold sweat that passes once danger has walked away. But I learned that true fear lingers. It settles in your bones. It wakes with you at dawn, eats with you at supper, and curls beside you on your mat at night. It is like a second skin, and you forget what it felt like to live without it. The nephew had many ways of reminding us of our place. Sometimes it was simple. He would appear in the marketplace, shove my husband in front of others, and laugh loudly, as though it were a game. Other times it was crueler. He would arrive at our home unannounced, push past me into the courtyard, and sit down as if he owned the very ground beneath him. I remember one evening especially. I had just finished cooking a small pot of lentils. The smell filled the house, and I was almost proud. We had gone without spice for days. But that night I had saved a little to make the food taste richer. My husband came in, tired, his shoulders drooping. But his eyes softened when he saw me waiting with the meal. For a moment it felt like love could make us forget the world outside. Then, his footsteps, heavy, careless, belonging to someone who never knocked. The nephew strode into the courtyard, his eyes scanning the food like a wolf sniffing prey. He sat down, reaching for the pot without a word. My hands froze. My husband lowered his gaze. And just like that, the meal I had prepared vanished into his greedy hands, leaving us staring at empty bowls. When he left, the silence was heavier than hunger. My husband tried to smile weakly to say, "It does not matter. We will eat tomorrow." But his voice broke, and I saw tears shining in his eyes before he turned away. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing, uneven in sleep. My own stomach groaned. But it was not the hunger that hurt me most. It was watching the man I loved shrink into a shadow of himself. Every humiliation, every demand, carved pieces out of him. His laughter grew rare, his shoulders bent lower, his words shorter. He stopped looking people in the eye, stopped speaking in gatherings. Once he had told me dreams of saving money, of one day owning a pair of oxen, so we would not have to borrow. But now, those dreams were silent, swallowed by the nephew's arrogance. And me? I wore my silence like a veil. In front of others I smiled, pretending life was as it should be. But inside my chest burned with something I did not yet dare to name. Anger, yes, sadness, more than I could hold. But beneath it all, a question kept returning, sharper each time. Is this truly all we deserve? The village saw everything. Do not think they were blind. But fear made them cowards. Whenever the nephew shoved someone, whenever he snatched food or insulted a man in the square, people looked away. They busied themselves with tying their bundles, with sweeping the dust, with pretending not to notice, and in their silence, his power grew stronger. Sometimes I would catch the eyes of other women, wives, mothers, widows, who too had felt his arrogance. Their eyes told me stories their lips could not, but we never spoke, not yet. Fear chained our tongues. The worst came one afternoon in the market. My husband had taken a basket of vegetables we had grown. Small, but enough to fetch a little money. I walked with him, proud, hopeful that we could buy oil and maybe a little cloth for repairing our clothes. But before we could even spread the basket, the nephew appeared. He looked down at the vegetables, then up at my husband, and smirked. "These look good. I'll take them." My husband tried to protest, just once, quietly. "We need to sell, sir." "Just for the oil." The nephew's eyes narrowed. In a flash, he shoved my husband hard, sending him stumbling into the dirt. The crowd gasped, but no one moved. My husband picked himself up slowly, shame painting his face red. And the nephew. He walked away laughing, carrying the basket as if it were his by right. I stood there frozen, my fists clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. My husband would not meet my eyes. He simply dusted his clothes, and we walked home in silence, with nothing in our hands, and even less in our hearts. That evening, when the lantern was low and the house had gone quiet, I sat by myself in the courtyard. The sky was dark, heavy with stars, and I felt their eyes watching me. I whispered into the night, though no one could hear. Is there no end to this? Must we bend forever? And for the first time, instead of silence, I felt something answer inside me, a stirring, a flicker, like the first spark of a hidden fire. I did not know then what I would do, but I knew this. I could not watch my husband break piece by piece until nothing of him remained. I could not raise children under the weight of a man's unchecked cruelty. Somewhere in the darkness, a seed of defiance began to root itself inside me. Small, fragile, but alive. It was the beginning of something I could not yet name. It is strange how strength is born. People think it comes like thunder, loud, sudden, shaking the earth. But in my life, strength came like a whisper, like a seed pressing its way quietly through the soil, so small at first that no one notices, not even the one carrying it. After that day in the market when the nephew walked away with our basket of vegetables and left my husband's dignity in the dirt, something shifted inside me. I could not erase the look on my husband's face, the mixture of shame, helplessness, and silence. That silence frightened me more than the nephew's arrogance, for silence is how people vanish long before their bodies leave the earth. I decided then, in the quiet of my heart, that I would no longer sit idle. If the men of the village bowed their heads in fear, then perhaps it was the women who must find another way. But how? We had nothing. No land beyond a small patch, no oxen, no silver hidden in clay pots like the wealthy. What could a young bride offer against the shadow of the chief's nephew? The answer came one evening as I sat with my mother-in-law, weaving a mat from dried reeds. My fingers moved almost without thought, bending, twisting, pulling. The mat grew steadily, row by row. She watched me and said softly, "Your hands are clever, child." Her words struck me like a spark. Hands. That was what I had. Not wealth, not power, but hands that could work. Hands that could weave, sew, cook, create. Perhaps that was where my strength must begin. The next day, after finishing my chores, I gathered leftover reeds and sat in the corner of the courtyard. I began weaving small baskets. My hands blistered, but I did not stop. Each basket I shaped carried a piece of my quiet defiance. At first, I hid them under my cot. I did not know what I would do with them, only that I must keep weaving. Then, one afternoon at the well, I saw an old widow struggling to carry her pots. I offered her one of my baskets shyly. Her eyes widened. "This is strong, well made. Did you do this?" When I nodded, she smiled. The kind of smile that warms you like the first sun after winter. "You could sell these," she whispered. "The market women will buy them. They always need baskets." My heart pounded. Sell them? The idea seemed bold, almost dangerous. But that night, as my husband slept and my mother-in-law snored softly beside the dying embers, I lay awake imagining it. If I could sell even a few, we might buy oil without begging. We might eat without shame. So I began. The first time I carried my baskets to the market, my legs trembled. I kept my eyes low, my shawl drawn tightly around me, afraid someone would laugh, or worse, that the nephew might notice. But to my surprise, the women welcomed me. A young mother bought one for a handful of coins, pressing them into my palm with a grateful nod. A farmer's wife traded vegetables for another. By midday, my basket was empty. I returned home with coins hidden in my blouse and a fire in my chest. For the first time, I had earned something of my own, something that no man could take with a shove or a smirk. But I told no one, not even my husband. The nephew's shadow was too long, and I feared if he learned of my small trade, he would crush it before it had a chance to grow. So I wove in secret, at night, by the dim light of the lantern, when others slept. My fingers twisted reeds into baskets. By day I carried them quietly to the market, sold them, and returned with hidden coins. Slowly my secret grew. I saved every coin, hiding them in a crack in the wall behind a loose stone. Each coin was not just money. It was freedom, waiting for its moment. But I was not alone. At the market, I began noticing the eyes of other women. Women who, like me, carried burdens heavier than water jars. A widow with 3 children, her face lined with sorrow. A young bride with bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. An older woman whose husband drank away whatever they earned. We began to talk, at first only about small things. Prices, weather, recipes. But soon the words grew bolder. We shared stories, whispered of the nephew's arrogance, of how he took from us all. One by one they leaned closer, voices low, as though confessing secrets. I realized then that I was not alone in my pain. Every woman carried her own wound, her own scar carved by power and silence. And in those whispers I heard the faint rhythm of something stronger. Sisterhood. We began to help each other quietly. If one had extra grain, she shared it. If another had no cloth, we pooled coins to buy it. When I sold baskets, I passed some to the widow, who sold them for me in her corner of the market. Together we created a small circle of survival, invisible to the nephew's eyes. And though our voices were still whispers, those whispers gave me strength. I remember one evening when the nephew barged into the courtyard again, demanding that my husband help dig ditches for his field. My husband nodded silently, his shoulders slumping. The nephew smirked, his gaze lingering on me with cruel amusement before he turned to leave. This time I did not lower my eyes. I did not speak, no. But I lifted my chin, just slightly, and let him see that I was not afraid. Only for a second our eyes met, and in that second I felt a new strength rising in me. Not loud, not reckless, but steady. After he left, I returned to my weaving, my fingers moving with determination. for I knew now that my fight had begun, not with swords or shouts, but with quiet baskets, with secret coins, with whispered alliances. The men of the village bowed in fear, but we women were beginning to build something else, something he could not see, not yet. And though the road ahead was long, and danger waited at every turn, I felt it in my bones. A time would come when our whispers would grow into a roar. But for now I wove, and I waited. Strength, I learned, never grows unseen forever. Like a sapling breaking through soil, sooner or later someone notices. And when that someone is a man who feeds on control, the moment he notices is the moment he strikes harder. The nephew began to sense it. Perhaps it was in the way I carried myself. No longer with eyes lowered, but with my chin just a little higher. Perhaps it was in the faint murmur of women at the market, our small network of sharing and survival that no longer bowed so easily. Or perhaps cruelty simply grows restless, always seeking new ways to tighten its grip. Whatever the reason, the days grew darker. It started with small things. One morning, as I walked to the market with my baskets, he appeared suddenly on the road. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at the bundle under my arm. "What do you carry?" he demanded. "Just reeds." I whispered, clutching the bundle closer. My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. He stared at me for a long moment, then snorted and walked away. But his suspicion had been lit. From that day I felt his eyes on me more often, watching, weighing, waiting. Then came the day he turned his cruelty into spectacle. It was harvest season. The air was thick with the smell of cut grain, the village alive with labor. Families gathered in fields, laughter mixing with the sound of sickles slicing through stalks. It should have been a time of joy. Grain meant life, meant food, meant survival for the months ahead. But the nephew arrived at our patch of field, swaggering as always, and claimed a portion as his own. "By order of the chief," he said loudly, though everyone knew it was a lie. "A share must be given to the leader's household." My husband's face went pale. He tried to argue softly, his words stumbling like a child learning to walk. But before he could finish, the nephew shoved him into the dirt, hard. The laughter of nearby laborers died into silence. Everyone watched, but no one moved. I ran to help my husband up, brushing the soil from his clothes. But the nephew's eyes fell on me. "Careful, bride," he sneered, his voice carrying for all to hear. "You look at me too directly these days. Be sure your tongue does not forget its place." The words struck like a slap, burning hotter than any hand could. The crowd shifted uneasily, but no one spoke, and in that silence, my humiliation grew roots. That night, my husband sat with his face in his hands, broken. I sat beside him, my fists clenched. "Why do you let him?" I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not anger but despair. "Because if I fight, he will crush us completely. You do not understand. He has the chief behind him. Who would stand with me?" And I realized then, his silence was not cowardice alone. It was hopelessness. A hopelessness planted in every man of the village, watered by years of fear. The nephew did not need fists to rule. He had silence as his weapon, silence sharper than any blade. But I could not accept it. Something inside me was breaking free piece by piece. A few days later, the nephew came again. This time, he walked straight into our courtyard, his boots stamping against the ground as if he owned it. He pointed at the small jars of grain stored by the wall. "Take one from my kitchen," he barked at my husband. My husband hesitated. Just for a breath, but it was enough. The nephew's face twisted with fury. He strode forward, and before I could move, he shoved my husband so hard that his head struck the wall. Blood trickled down his temple, and my cry tore through the air. I rushed to him, holding his face in my hands, my heart pounding with terror. My husband groaned, his eyes half closed. And the nephew, he laughed, as if another man's pain were nothing but a joke to fill his evening. Then he seized the jar of grain and left, his laughter echoing down the lane. That night, as I cleaned the wound on my husband's head, tears slid silently down my cheeks. My hands trembled, but my heart was firm. This was no longer just about hunger or shame or even dignity. This was about survival. If we allowed him to continue, he would one day take everything. Our food, our home, our lives. The next morning I walked to the well, my shawl pulled tightly, my eyes burning. There I found the widow, the young bride, the farmer's wife. Their faces told me they had seen, they had heard. And for the first time I spoke aloud what we had all whispered in our hearts. We cannot endure this alone. We must stand together. Their eyes widened, glancing around nervously. But then slowly, one by one, they nodded. That day something was born among us. Not loud, not visible, but powerful. We began to meet in quiet corners, sharing not only food and coins, but also resolve. We taught each other skills. One woman knew how to weave cloth, another how to grind herbs for medicine, another how to bargain in the market without being cheated. Together we began to build strength, not with fists, but with hands, with minds, with hearts bound together. The nephew still roamed the village, arrogant and untouchable. But now, when I looked into his eyes, I did not lower mine. I met his gaze, steady, silent, letting him see that I was no longer the trembling bride he once mocked. He sensed it. I could see the flicker of anger, of suspicion, in the tightening of his jaw. And I knew the storm was not over. No, it was only just beginning. But I also knew this. He might strike harder. He might try to break us further. Yet for the first time, I was not alone. Behind me stood women whose courage matched my own. And together, we were no longer ants scattered before his boots. We were roots, deep and unseen, holding the ground firm beneath his feet. And when roots grow strong enough, even the mightiest tree can be brought down. I often say that courage does not arrive like thunder. It comes quietly, like the morning light creeping into a darkened room. At first you barely notice it, but then slowly, it fills every corner, until even the shadows retreat. For us women, courage grew in whispers. We met at the well, at the edges of fields, under the pretense of borrowing salt or sharing recipes. To any passerby, it was the same chatter of women as always. But behind our words, something stronger was being woven, like a net stitched from scraps, piece by piece, until one day it could carry weight. The widow taught us how to stretch food further, how to grind husks into flour when the grain was scarce. The young bride, clever with her hands, showed us how to braid reeds into mats that could be sold at market. The farmer's wife, with her sharp eyes, explained how to read the measures used by traders so we would not be cheated. I shared my little secrets too. The ways I had hidden coins, the tricks of bargaining, the art of appearing meek while keeping my dignity safe within. We were no longer only survivors of our own households. Together we became teachers, protectors, sisters. At first it was only enough to keep our families from starving, but slowly our work grew. A mat sold here, a pouch of herbs there, a small coin saved. And with every small victory, our backs straightened a little more. I remember the first time I felt truly different. I was at the market selling a small woven basket. My hands trembled as I held it out, expecting mockery or dismissal. But instead the buyer nodded and handed me coins. Coins! My own, not taken by the nephew, not given by my husband, but earned by my labor. As I walked home that day, the coins hidden in the fold of my dress, my heart beat with a new rhythm. It was not pride, not yet, but something close, a seed of independence, buried deep in my chest. But shadows do not like light, and the nephew, always prowling, began to notice. He saw women gathering more often, their eyes less downcast, their voices steadier. He saw me walking with firmer steps, my gaze less fearful, and his suspicion grew like a thorn. One evening he appeared again at our courtyard. My husband froze, his shoulders slumping as if bracing for another blow. The nephew's eyes roamed over the jars, the tools, the small bundle of reeds by the wall. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. My heart thudded, but I forced calm into my voice. "Reeds for weaving." "Just for the house." He stepped closer, so near I could feel his breath. "Be careful, woman. A wife's hands should serve her husband's house, not wander into trade. Do you forget your place?" I bowed my head, but inside I burned. I did not answer, for silence was still my shield. He lingered, glaring, but found nothing he could seize. At last he spat on the ground and left, muttering threats. That night I gathered with the women in secret. Their faces were tense, afraid that he might act against us. "If he learns of our earnings," whispered the young bride, "he will take everything." I looked at them, at the fear in their eyes, and I spoke the words that had been forming in my heart for weeks. "Then we must not only hide. We must grow stronger, so strong that even if he sees, he cannot take it all. One basket may be stolen, but not the skill to weave. One jar may be seized, but not the knowledge to grind herbs. If he tries to crush us, we must be many, not one." They listened, and slowly hope flickered. So we worked harder and wiser. We began to share tasks, pooling our efforts. One woman wove mats in bulk, another prepared herbs, another took them to market. We passed earnings secretly, in folded cloth, in jars of grain, in bundles of firewood. Coins trickled like drops, but together they became a stream. With those coins we bought small things: needles, better baskets, seeds for the fields. Each purchase felt like a step toward freedom, and freedom has a sound. It is the sound of women laughing together, not timidly, but freely. It is the sound of a child eating full, not half. It is the sound of a woman singing while she works, her voice unafraid of being overheard. For the first time in years, such sounds began to fill our homes. But the nephew was not blind. His visits grew more frequent. He would loom at the edges of the market, watching me bargain, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Once he even followed me part way home, though I pretended not to notice. His power was still heavy, but something had changed. When he looked at me now, he did not see the trembling girl who had once lowered her eyes. He saw someone he could not fully read, someone who might slip from his grip. And for a man like him, that was unbearable. I felt the storm gathering. His anger was a tide, rising unseen, waiting to crash. But I no longer felt as I once had, because behind me now I had sisters, a circle of women who had chosen not to bow. And though our strength was still fragile, though our earnings still meager, though our men still bowed in silence, we had already changed. You see, once a woman tastes dignity, she cannot forget its flavor. Once she holds a coin of her own, she cannot unlearn its weight. Once she stands upright, she cannot go back to crawling. The nephew had ruled us with fear, but now, for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes too. He feared what happens when silence breaks. He feared the roots we had grown beneath his boots. And deep in my heart I knew the day would come when his cruelty would meet a wall it could not climb. Not because one woman stood against him, but because many did, side by side. Storms do not announce themselves with lightning. They begin with stillness, the kind that makes birds fall silent, the air thick with waiting. That was the feeling in the village in those days. The nephew was restless. He stalked through the lanes with sharper eyes, spoke with a harsher voice, struck quicker at the smallest provocation. And though everyone bowed, though silence still wrapped the men like chains, there was an uneasiness in the air, like soil trembling before rain. I felt it most sharply one morning when I returned from the market. The nephew stood at my doorway, his arms folded, his lips curled into a smile that was not a smile. My heart lurched, but I kept my face calm. "You walk boldly these days," he said, his voice low. "Too boldly for a woman of your station." I bowed slightly. "I only go to market, sir." His eyes narrowed. "And yet your husband's house has more jars of grain now than last season. More cloth, more mats. Where does this wealth come from? My blood ran cold. He had seen. He had counted. Before I could answer, my husband stepped forward. His voice trembled, but he tried to shield me. We saved carefully. She is clever with her hands. Nothing more. The nephew laughed, loud and cruel. Saved? Clever? Do not insult me with such words. I know theft when I see it. You dare steal from me. Me, the blood of the chief. He shoved my husband so hard that he stumbled against the wall. I rushed to steady him, my hands shaking. The nephew leaned close to me then, his breath hot, his words venom. You forget your place, woman! I will not allow it. Tomorrow I will take half your stores. Consider it punishment and warning. Then he left, his boots pounding like war drums, his laughter echoing through the lane. That night, my husband sat with his head in his hands, despair heavy on his shoulders. We cannot fight him, he whispered. If he takes half, what choice do we have? At least we will still live. But I could not accept that. Half today meant all tomorrow. Submission meant slavery forever. So I gathered with the women, my voice fierce though my heart pounded with fear. He will come tomorrow. If he takes ours, he will take yours next. We cannot let him. Not this time. They looked at me, their faces pale, their hands twisting nervously. The widow whispered, What can we do? He is the chief's blood. I stood, my voice steady. We can stand together. If he comes for my grain, let him see not one woman weeping, but many women standing. He feeds on our silence. Let us starve him of it. There was a long silence. Then, one by one, they nodded. The next morning the sun rose bright and pitiless. The nephew arrived as promised, swaggering, his eyes glittering with cruelty. Behind him trailed two of his friends, men eager to share his power. He strode into our courtyard and pointed at the jars of grain. Take them, he barked to his friends. Half of everything. But before they could move, I stepped forward. My body trembled, but my voice rang clear. No. The men froze. The nephew's head snapped toward me, disbelief flashing across his face. What did you say? I swallowed hard, my knees weak. But I did not look away. No, you will not take what we have earned. For a heartbeat, silence held the air. Then came the sound of footsteps. One by one, women appeared at the edges of the courtyard. The widow, the young bride, the farmer's wife, and others. More than I had dared hope. They stood behind me, their faces pale, but their eyes steady. The nephew's laughter burst out, harsh and mocking. What is this? A parade of hens clucking together? Do you think your chatter frightens me? But though his laughter filled the air, I saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the momentary falter. He had expected me alone. Not this. Not many. I lifted my chin, my voice shaking but loud enough for all to hear. We are not afraid anymore. If you touch one of us, you touch us all. A murmur rose from the women, not loud, but firm. Their unity was a wall, invisible yet unbreakable. The nephew's face darkened. Fury twisted his features. He raised his hand as if to strike me. But before it could fall, the widow stepped forward. Strike her, and you strike me too. Then the young bride. And me. Then the farmer's wife. And me. Their voices rose one by one, until a chorus filled the courtyard. And me, and me, and me. The nephew froze, his hand trembling in the air. His friends shifted uneasily, their bravado faltering under so many eyes. I stared into his face, my fear burning into resolve. You cannot silence us all. You cannot steal from us all. We are done bowing. For a long, tense moment he stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes darting from woman to woman. His power, once so effortless, now seemed brittle, fragile, like a clay pot ready to crack. Finally, with a curse, he lowered his hand. His laughter returned, but it was hollow, forced. Fools! Do you think this is the end? The chief will hear of your insolence. You will regret this. And with that, he stormed away, his friends trailing behind him. When he was gone, silence filled the courtyard. My knees nearly buckled, the weight of what had just happened crashing down. But then, slowly, the women began to smile, Small smiles at first, then wider, brighter. The widow clasped my hand. "We did it," she whispered. The young bride's eyes shone. "For the first time, I am not afraid." Tears filled my eyes, but they were not the tears of fear. They were tears of triumph, for we had faced the storm, and though it raged, we had not bent. That night, as I lay beside my husband, he looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not just love, not just worry, but respect, deep, unshakable respect. "You are braver than all of us," he whispered. I shook my head gently. "Not braver, just not alone anymore." And that was the truth. The nephew still had power, still had the chief's name behind him, but his reign of silence was broken. We had spoken, we had stood, and nothing could erase that. The roots had broken through the soil. The tree that once towered over us had begun to shake, and though storms might come again, we knew this. Together, we could endure. Together we could fight. Together we could win. They say a wounded beast is the most dangerous. The nephew, humiliated in front of women he had always mocked, was no different. In the days that followed our defiance, he prowled like a storm denied its thunder. He barked at villagers in the street, lashed out at his own servants, stomped through the market with rage in his eyes. Everyone knew something had shifted, though no one dared say it aloud. But his pride would not rest, and pride, when threatened, becomes reckless. One evening, just as the sky was painted with the orange of setting sun, he came again. This time not with laughter, not with taunts, but with fury. Behind him were not two friends, but half a dozen men, armed with sticks. His voice roared through the lane. "Bring me the woman!" I was inside, grinding herbs by the fire. My husband's face drained of color as the shouts filled the courtyard. He turned to me, his hands trembling. "Stay hidden," he whispered. "I will speak to him." But I knew hiding would not save us now. Hiding had never saved us. I rose, my heart pounding, and stepped into the courtyard. The nephew's eyes lit up with cruel triumph. "So here she is, the one who teaches hens to cluck like lions." His men laughed, the sound harsh, eager for violence. My knees shook, but I stood tall. "You come with sticks against women?" I asked, my voice steady though my throat burned. "Is this your courage?" His face twisted with rage. He raised his hand, ready to strike me himself, but before the blow could fall, a voice rose from beyond the walls. "Enough!" It was the widow, her voice sharp as steel. She stood at the entrance, her back straight, her eyes blazing. Behind her came the farmer's wife, the young bride, and others. Women from across the village. Their faces were pale, but their steps were steady. They carried no weapons, only baskets, brooms, and tools of their daily labor. Yet their presence filled the air with power. The nephew faltered, his raised hand trembling in the air. He barked at his men, "Drive them away!" But the men hesitated. For the first time, they were not facing one victim, but many. The women stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the path, their voices rising together. "No more!" The shout rolled like thunder, echoing off the mud walls, spilling into the street. Doors creaked open, villagers peering out. Men, too, began to gather. Silent at first, but watching, their faces troubled. The nephew turned, expecting them to join him. "Will you let your women shame you?" he bellowed. "Are you men or mice?" But none moved. They only watched, and in their silence I saw something change. Their shame was not at us, but at him. The widow lifted her chin. "You think you rule us with fear, but fear breaks when we stand together. You cannot strike us all." The young bride stepped forward, her voice clear. "We have lived in your shadow long enough. No more." And then something I had never imagined happened. One by one, the men, our husbands, brothers, neighbors, began to step closer. They did not take sides with words. Not yet. But their silence was broken by the weight of their presence. They stood behind their women, awkward but steady, their faces hardening as they looked at the nephew. The nephew's laughter faltered. He shouted again, but his voice cracked with desperation. His men shifted nervously, no longer so eager to swing their sticks. I stepped forward, my heart thundering. You are not the chief. You are not the voice of this village. You are only one man, and today you stand alone." The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not fearful. It was the silence before collapse, the kind that comes when a wall has cracked and is about to fall. The nephew's face burned red. He spat on the ground, cursing us, cursing the village. Then, with a furious roar, he turned and stormed away, his men trailing like dogs without fight. We stood frozen, hardly believing. Then slowly the truth sank in. He had retreated. For the first time he had been driven back. The women began to weep, not with sorrow, but with relief, with triumph. The young bride clutched my hands, tears streaming down her face. We did it. We stood, and he could not break us. The widow whispered, "This is only the beginning," and she was right. From that day, the nephew's shadow shrank. He still strutted through the village, still tried to throw his weight, but the air was different. When he shouted, people no longer bowed their heads as deeply. When he demanded, women no longer trembled. And when he raised his hand, there was always another hand nearby, ready to hold it back. The chief himself eventually heard whispers of what had happened. Perhaps he was angered. Perhaps he was ashamed, but he did not come to punish us. Perhaps even he knew. When the roots of a people begin to rise, even a chief cannot crush them. For me, life did not become easy. We still labored, still scraped, still fought hunger with hard work. But dignity is its own bread. Respect is its own roof. And with each passing season, we women grew stronger. Our work more valued. Our voices harder to silence. I remember one evening, months later, as I sat weaving a basket with the young bride by my side. She looked at me and said softly, "You taught us that we are not weak, that we can fight without fists." I smiled, my heart swelling. "I only reminded you of what was already there. Strength was always in us. It only needed to join hands. And that, children, is the truth I want you to carry. Power may roar with fists and titles, but true strength is quiet, steady, shared. It is women linking arms. It is neighbors standing together. It is silence breaking into song." The nephew thought he could rule us with fear, but fear is fragile. Once shattered, it cannot be rebuilt. What lasts, what endures, is courage. And courage, when shared, can change even the darkest of villages. That is how we survived. That is how we lived. And that is why, even now, I tell you this story. Not to remember cruelty, but to honor the strength that rose against it. For no matter how powerful the oppressor, when hearts unite, even the mightiest shadow cannot block the dawn. My children, you have listened to a long tale tonight. Perhaps you wonder why an old woman tells such stories, why she opens wounds from years long buried. But memories are not only pain, they are also seeds. If we do not share them, the next generation will never know what grew before them, what storms were weathered, what battles were fought in silence. I was once a girl who trembled at every footstep of the chief's nephew. I bent my head. I swallowed my words. I lived in fear, and for years I thought that was all life would ever be, an endless chain of silence. But silence can break, and when it does not shatter like glass. It sings like a bell. The day we stood together, the day we faced him not as one frightened woman, but as many unafraid voices, something shifted inside me forever. I realized then that oppression is not only the cruelty of one man, it is the silence of many. And when silence ends, power crumbles. Do not mistake me, children. Life did not become a golden dream after that day. The fields were still hard, the winters still cold, the grain still scarce. The nephew still walked among us, though smaller, though weaker in spirit. But we no longer walked with chains around our necks. I earned coins with my own hands. I fed my children with food not stolen, but made. I looked in the mirror and saw not just a tired woman, but a woman who had stood tall when it mattered, And the women who once whispered in shadows, they grew, each in her own way. The widow became a healer sought by all. The young bride, once timid, grew into a leader among us, her voice sharp and wise. Even the men once bowed in shame learned to lift their heads again, not in arrogance, but in quiet respect. That is the legacy of courage. It does not end with one moment. It spreads, like fire carried from torch to torch, until the whole village glows. I tell you this so you understand. Strength is not given. It is built, not with fists, not with swords, but with hearts that refuse to break. If ever in your life you feel small, remember this story. Remember that a group of women, armed with nothing but their hands, their will, and their unity, stood against the power of a chief's nephew, and won, not in riches, not in titles, but in dignity. And dignity, my children, is the richest treasure of all. So when life presses on you, when fear whispers that you are too weak, remember, you are never alone. Look beside you. Someone else carries the same fear, the same burden. Take their hand. Stand together. Because when hands join, when voices unite, even the darkest shadow cannot withstand the light of dawn. And now, as the night deepens and your eyes grow heavy, I leave you with this truth. The world will always have nephews who swagger with borrowed power, who try to bend others with fear. But the world will also always have women, and men, and children, who rise together and say, "No more. It is not the nephew's name I want remembered, nor his cruelty. Let him fade like smoke in the wind. Remember instead the courage, the unity, the moment when silence became strength, for that is what endures. That is what I carry in my heart even now, in the twilight of my years. That is what I give to you tonight, as my story becomes yours. And may you too, when your time comes, stand tall.